Now, we are going to talk about the iterators and iterables in Python. Earlier, we have seen that how we can create the iterator object by implementing next and the iter method. The next method is able to give you the next element in the container, and iter method is just returning the object itself. Right? Now, doing that, we can use the for loop. We can use the same sequence type in the list comprehension, right? And we can use any method which returns or which require the iterable object. But there was some two issue or the two questions. The first issue was, so the first question was, when we looked over the iterating or like looked over the iterator using for loop, we saw that the iter was being called at first. And the second was, the iterator gets exhausted after we finished iterating it fully, which means that whenever we need to create a new iterator object or whenever we need to iterate it again, we have to create a new iterator object, right? So the question is, can we somehow avoid having to remember that creating a new object every time? So the answer to both question is related, depend on top of related on each other. So let's start by looking at how we can create the new object, right, of the collection every time we want to iterate it over, right? So first we'll look at how we might avoid creating a new object, right? Now here, let's start with a simple example. Here we have the city class, we have the init method. In the init method, we have the underscore city, which has the number of element. We have the index. We have implemented the iter method, which return the self object or which return the object itself. We have the next method. In the next method, we check that whether if the length of the city is greater than equal to, that means if the index is greater than equal to the length of the city, then we'll stop iteration. Otherwise, we'll get the index and increment the index. So here we are getting the object using index and incrementing the index and then returning the object. And this is what a basics things that we had discussed earlier. Let's create this city class. Now we have the iterator object because we have implemented the iter method over here. Now, but we need to recreate it every time we want to start the iteration again from the beginning, right? So here, let's create the city object, right? We have to, if we want to use this in a enumerate, here we are using the city object. Again, we are using the same object. So here we are again creating the object and using in the list comprehension, we are using in the sorted functions, right? So basically we have to restart the iterator. That means by creating the new object every time or new iterator object every time. But in this case, we are also recreating the underlying data every time. That means every time we are recreating this city object, right? So the question is, can we split the iterator part and the data part? That means can we initialize this once and then we iterate it every time whenever we want to iterate the data or whenever we want to iterate the object. So we want to split this both part over here. So first we have the city class. The init method initialize the city like underscore city list, which has the all the data of the city. And then we have the len method, which will give you the total length of this object. So let's run this, right? Now here, so this is the data part and this is the iterator part. That means this time we are creating a new class called city iter, which has the init method, which takes the city object, right? So here we'll create our first object. First we'll create the object of the city and then we'll pass the object of this city over here, right? And then we have the index value over here. Again, now we have the iter method in this city iter class. And then we have the next method, which is same as what we have implemented over here, right? There is nothing new code over here. So the new thing is we have separated this data part and this iterator part over here, right? And now this iterator, city iterator takes the city object whenever we create the instance of the city iter, right? So now let's run this. Now first we need to create the city object, and again we only need to create one time. Like here we are only creating the city object only once, right? Now every time when we want to iterate it to this city, we want to create the city iter object. So here this object needs the city object, and now we have created the one iterator. Now we are taking the loop of this iterator, because we know that if we use the for loop every time we call the iterator. So this is the iterator object, right? So now we can take the for loop over here. Now we can print the value. We can also use the here we are also creating a second iterator and using in the list comprehension. So now we know that now we are creating a two iterator over here, right? But so but we still have to remember to create a new iterator over here, right? We have to create a new iterator whenever we want to iterate it to the city data set. But now we cannot iterate this city object. We cannot iterate this city object because there is no iter method implemented in the city class, right? So when we try to use the for loop, we'll get error over here, right? So now this is the first question we asked, right? So we have done this. So whenever we iterate our iterator, the first thing it calls is it calls the iter method, right? So here we are changing this our city iter uh, class a bit. So init method has been changed. Whenever the init method of the city iterator will call, it will print calling city iter init. Whenever the iterator of the city iter like call, right? So whenever we try to iterate the object of this city iter, right? It will call calling city iter instance iter, and then whenever the new object will be called or new object it will return, it will call calling next, right? So we have re-implemented our city iter. Now whenever we create the object, it will call the calling city iter init, because here we have created the object. So this init method has been called, right? And whenever we take the loop of this iterator, it is calling city iter instance iterator. Here we have this calling city iter instance iterator we are printing. Then now the next method is being called. So now we know how the iterable defined in Python. Iterable is implement. So iterable is the object which implement the iter method, and the method returns the iterator which can be used to iterate over the object, right? So this method return the iterator object, which now we'll use that object to iterate it over, right? Now what happens if we put the iter method into the city object and after that we try to iterate it? So whenever we try to iterate over the city instance, the object of the city, the Python will first call the iter method, and then the iter method should return the iterator object, which will use the which we can use that for the iteration. So here what we are doing is, now we have this city iterator, right? So now we have the city iterator. This is our city iterator, and now we have the city object as well. So this city object also have the iter method implementation, and this city iterator also have the iter method implementation. Whenever we call the iterator method or iter method of the city object or the instance of the city, it will print calling city instance iterator. So whenever we call this, it is calling city instance iterator, and look what this iter method is returning. This iter method is returning the, so basically it first create the object of city iterator. Here we can see that we are creating the object of city iterator and returning that object. So whenever we try to loop over the object of this, indirectly we are trying to loop over the object of this city iterator, right? So let's try to run this. Whenever we have created the object, now when we try to loop over the object or the loop over the instance of this city, right? Whenever we try to do this, it will call the iter method, right? And because of the iter method, we are able to call this, and now we are able to print it. So this object will be called every time. Here we can see that calling city instance iterator, because first we are printing this calling city instance iterator, and now it calls the calling iterator in it because the object of this has been created, right? Object this we are printing because we are calling the init and the object has been printed over here. And then every time we are printing the next method, right? Every time we are printing the next method over here. We are not calling this method as of now, right? Here we can see that we can even do that again, because every time when we try to loop over this, every time when we try to loop over the object, it will create a new object, right? So we do not have issue now. So we do not have the problem of exhausting, right? A new iterator was created when the for loop was started. Here we can see that. In fact, the same happens for everything that is going to iterate our iterables. First is called the iter method of the iterator, right? And then it try to call the next method. Again, when we call the enumerate, it does the same thing. When we call the sorted, it does the same thing, right? Now let's try to put everything together. First, let's try to delete this city iterator object. Now here we are implementing the same thing in just one class. We have the city class. Now it is calling the city iterator, and now we are implementing the city iterator here as well, right? So everything in just one place. Now we can create the object. We can use the enumerate, right? Here, let's see that here we are getting the two object of the cities. So first we are doing is, first we are trying to like we know we already have the city object. Now we are trying to iterate over the city object. So when we get the iterator instance, here we are calling the iterator instance by calling the iter method. We have created the two object, and this time we call this calling the city instance iterator and calling iterator in it. We can see that. So city instance iterator means here when we call the iter function, it called this iter, right? And then it created the object of this, right? And again, both iterator are totally new. We can check the object. It's a different object, right? Now we also have the same understanding that now we should also know that why iterator also implement the iter method, right? So that it return themselves, right? Now, now we know how the iterator works, right? Now we'll talk about the iterator and the sequence type. So city is the iterable now, but it is not a sequence type. That means we cannot index it. We have created the object, we can check the length, but we cannot call via the, we cannot access the element via the index. When we try to do this, here we'll get the error. Since our city should be the sequence, right? So we can implement the get item method to make it sequence. So here we have this method in the get item method, right? We are so we are implementing this method, and now it will return the object at a particular locations. So now we have all the things in this. So now we have the object. Now we can create the, now we can access the object. We can also like we can also iterate the iterable object. So first we are calling the iterable, and then we are calling the next. So let's see what is happening over here. We are calling the city instance iterator, then we are creating the object, and then we are calling the next, right? We can also use, so when we call the for loop, when we call the for loop. We have also seen that in the for loop, when we used or when we implement the get item method, the for loop works. But let's see which method is being called. So when we call the for loop, it is calling the city iterator method. It is calling the iterator method, iter method instead of get item method. That means if both method is available we have, then the priority will goes to the iter method. But if the iter method is not implemented, the get item method will be called, right? Now Python have built-in iterable and iterators. So here we have this list. Now since list is the iterable, they implement the iter method and we can get the iterator for the list, right? So here we can call the we are calling the, so first we are trying to get the iterator of the object. So we call this as iter L. Let's check the type of iter L. So we have this list iterator, we have this next of iter L. We'll get the object, again we'll get the object, again we'll get the object, and this time we'll get the stop iteration. So Python also implement the same thing. Here we have seen this demo on the Python built-in list method or Python built-in list data type, right? So the same thing happens with the Python. Since iter is the iterator, it also implement the iter method, right? We can check the ID of both. We can check the ID of the iterator of iter and the ID of iter L, right? We can see that both ID are same. We can check that whether this next is implemented in this or not. Will get true because next is there. That's the reason, like that's the way, right? We get the next object. We can check the iter is there or not. It is. Since L is the iterable, it also implement the iter method because the iterator of the list has also the iter method and the list also has the iter method. But list itself does not have the next method. That means when we loop over the list, right? That means it call their iterator object. It call the iterator of the list. So next will not have the list method. Here we can get the false, right? Since list are also the sequence type, we have the get item method, right? Now let's check for the set and the dictionary, where these two data types are not the sequence type. That means the values are not predictable at the index. We can check the get item is there or not in the set. Actually, no. So set does not have the get item method because it is not a sequence type. It has the iter method because it is the iterable. We can check the next of the iter functions. It is there. We can check the iterator in the directory. It is there. In the dictionary, we have the iter method. But what does the iter for the dictionary? So here, whenever we have this dictionary, we create the iterator, and when we take the next of the iterator, we'll get the key. So by default, when we iterate the dictionary, we'll get the key. You can get the values by using values method, right? You can also get both the key and the value by using item method. Here we get this. We can check this, right? So now we know about list, about the sequence type and non-sequence type. So sequence type and the non-sequence type both has their iterator class, right? And yeah, this is it all about the iterator and the iterable in the Python. Thank you very much.